Prof, thank you for talking to me. So were you surprised at all, or was this always going to happen?
Yeah, no, anybody who's vaguely familiar with the law would have known that this was going to happen, because the mistakes inside the report were so egregious and so obvious. For example, as the court pointed out today, that the public protector invoked the Corruption Act to say that this gives a legal basis for a fining of money laundering, but the Corruption Act does not deal with money laundering. That's a separate act. So that kind of mistakes are so obvious that it wasn't really going to go any other way.
So let's start then with this whole question around misleading, willfully misleading. Parliament, I understand that to be the correct wording, but I think she used the word deliberately misleading Parliament. That was quickly dismissed by the High Court. And are you surprised that that was the outcome, given that, you know, it all centered around whether or not the president was aware which 500,000 rand Busisiwe Mkhwebane was talking about at the point at which he answered the question in Parliament?
Yes, so there were two problems with this finding. Firstly, as you sort of hinted at, the public protector used the wrong wording of the Executive Ethics Code. And she then, if that's already a mistake in law, you can't use the wrong wording of a section of the law to apply it. Secondly, she conceded that the president had acted in good faith, but she nevertheless found he basically lied in good faith. So that doesn't make any sense. So on a factual basis, the court also found that the finding was completely irrational.
And I'm wondering, there are key words that keep coming back, Professor DeForce, because invariably we're always going to compare this with previous judgments that have gone against this particular public protector. Words like irrationally, but also did not appear to be acting with an open mind. And that is a requirement in terms of what a public protector is supposed to do. If this continues as a recurring theme, even as the process that's happening in Parliament it gets underway, it is concerning for that institution, isn't it?
Yes, so it makes it very difficult for the institution to function with any credibility. If court after court basically makes two findings, that the public protector is not impartial, that she doesn't have an open mind, is dishonest, and secondly, that she lacks basic legal knowledge and skill, that doesn't instill confidence. So regardless of your politics, whether your complaint is about the Home Affairs not giving you an ID, or whether it's about the president doing something, it becomes very difficult to trust the public protector's office to do a proper investigation based on the law and the facts and come to a finding that will actually stick if it is taken to court.
But what do we say, though, Prof, in as far as the hygiene of our democracy is concerned? Because, you know, putting aside the very damning findings that the court has made on a legal question against Busisiwe Mkhwebane, there are still questions as to what extent do we need the transparency in as far as people who fund the private campaigns of individuals seeking high office in political parties. That's not covered, for instance, by the current Political Party Funding Act. That remains a lacuna, as it were, in our law.
Yes, so that is the big problem, is that in fact, at the moment, we still don't have binding law that requires political parties to reveal their funding. The law was passed, but it's not yet in operation. So that is the first hurdle. Then the second hurdle would be individuals who campaign for positions within a political party. They have to reveal their funding. At the moment, there's no legislation for that. I think Parliament should pass such legislation, whether you are running for the ANC presidency, whether you're running for a position to be nominated for the City Council of Lusiki, you should be held accountable for the money you receive, because that is where often the corruption happens. You receive funds, maybe to pay for your campaigning, and then once you get in, you're going to do favors for that person who gave you money. So unless there's transparency, it is an invitation to corruption, even though there might be cases where there's no corruption, but it is an invitation for corruption.
So, I mean, she's due to go, is Busisiwe Mkhwebane, to the courts to try and challenge the rules around the removal of heads of Chapter 9 institutions. These are institutions supporting constitutional democracy. But the findings, with today's being the latest, keep piling on like an avalanche. How do they weigh in as far as that particular debate is concerned, where the technicality is about the rules that are meant to support Parliament's oversight over these Chapter 9 institutions?
Yeah, the two things do not have a direct correlation, because if the rules are valid, they are valid. If they are invalid, they are invalid, regardless of what the public protector might have or might not have done. That's one argument. I think personally that she's going to have difficulty with convincing the court that the rules are invalid, because the rules basically give effect to the Constitutional Court judgment in the matter of the impeachment of the president. So they apply the same kind of criteria. It doesn't seem to be straying too much from the judgment. So I'm not sure that there's a thing. The real question will then be, if the rules are found to be valid, then there will be a process in which Parliament will have to decide whether to remove the public protector, and that all depends on how the MPs from the national ANC are going to vote, because there's clearly disagreement between different factions in the ANC about whether Advocate Mkhwebane should be removed or whether she should be seen as a champion of a specific faction.
All right, we'll have to wait and see. Professor Pierre de Vos, I appreciate your time and your insights. Professor Pierre de Vos there, helping us make sense of the judgment coming out of the High Court in Pretoria around the public protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane. The wheels of justice continue to grind, and Busisiwe Mkhwebane seems to be finding herself on the wrong end of that particular process, at least at this stage.